Life can sometimes seem perfect until reality shatters the illusion. For Julie, everything seemed to be going well until 5 months ago. She ended what she thought would be her forever relationship with the man she had planned to spend her life with. It wasn't an easy decision. Leaving him felt like tearing out a piece of her heart. She had dreamed of a life together, full of laughter and shared dreams, but deep down, she knew staying would mean sacrificing parts of herself. To make matters worse, Julie's beloved grandma was slowly slipping away to dementia, losing memories of the moments they'd once cherished together. It felt as if the walls of her life were closing in, leaving her trapped in a dark, lonely place. Each day became a struggle, her heart weighed down by grief and guilt, but she was holding on, one small step at a time, trying to find a way forward. Julie worked at the local library, where her days were spent shelving books and helping readers find their next adventure. It was supposed to be a quiet, comforting place, but her mind rarely stayed in the moment. Instead, it wandered to her grandma, to the memories slipping away like sand through her fingers. One day, as she was lost in thought, her best friend Cheryl appeared, her face filled with concern. Cheryl was never one to sugarcoat things, and that day was no exception. "Julie, you look terrible," she said bluntly, crossing her arms as she assessed her friend's pale face and tired eyes. Julie forced a smile, deflecting Cheryl's concern with sarcasm, but inside, she knew Cheryl was right. The sleepless nights, the constant ache of loss, and the weight of her own mind were becoming unbearable. Maybe, as Cheryl suggested, it was time to seek help from someone who could really understand. Taking Cheryl's advice to heart, Julie decided to see a therapist. The very next day, she found herself sitting in Dr. Thompson's office, feeling both nervous and relieved. The room was warm and cozy, with gentle lighting that softened the space. Dr. Thompson himself was an older man, probably in his late 50s, with a calm presence that made Julie feel safer, if only for a moment. "Tell me what's on your mind, Julie," he began, his voice calm and inviting. Julie hesitated, searching for where to begin. She managed to say, "It's everything. I feel like I'm drowning." Dr. Thompson nodded, understanding that her pain was multi-layered, not just about her breakup or her grandma's illness, but an overwhelming sense of loss. Over the next few sessions, Julie found herself revealing things she hadn't even admitted to herself. She felt raw and vulnerable, but the release of years of bottled-up pain and sadness slowly brought a sense of relief. Each session with Dr. Thompson helped Julie peel back another layer of her emotions. She started to open up about her deepest fears and the loneliness she'd felt in her relationship. Dr. Thompson listened intently, responding with gentle encouragement. "You've got so much on your shoulders, Julie. It's no wonder you feel this way," he'd say, and she would feel a little lighter. For the first time, Julie felt like someone truly understood her struggles. Therapy became her sanctuary, a place where she could explore her emotions without fear of judgment. As the weeks went by, her burden felt a little less heavy, and a small glimmer of hope returned. Then, one day after a session, she walked out of Dr. Thompson's office feeling lighter than she had in months. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything, and she found herself smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. But her relief was short-lived. Later that evening, while she was heating up a simple dinner in her tiny apartment, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Dr. Thompson, reminding her about a follow-up appointment. Staring at the message, Julie realized just how much she relied on her sessions. She wasn't sure how she felt about needing someone so deeply. Still, she couldn't deny that her sessions were becoming a lifeline. Over time, she built a fragile trust in Dr. Thompson, something she hadn't felt in years. Yet, as the months rolled on, that line between professional and personal began to blur. Eventually, after a breakthrough session, Dr. Thompson suggested they meet outside the office, maybe for coffee. At first, she hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate, but his warmth and gentle approach reassured her, and she agreed, curious to see a different side of the man who had been helping her rediscover herself. On a bright Wednesday afternoon, they met at a cozy cafe, both of them a bit awkward but eager to chat. It was strange seeing Dr. Thompson, or rather, James, as he asked her to call him, outside the office. He was dressed casually, in jeans and a shirt, looking more like a friend than the composed professional she was used to. The conversation flowed easily, and Julie found herself laughing at his stories and opening up about her own life beyond their sessions. She shared her new hobby of painting, which she'd taken up as a way to cope. James listened intently, his gaze warm and encouraging. Then, as he leaned forward, his expression softened. "You're incredibly strong, Julie. I've watched you grow through so much," he said quietly. Julie blushed, feeling a warmth in his compliment that she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a turning point, one that made her wonder if she'd found something beyond therapy in James's companionship. As they met for coffee and casual dinners over the next few weeks, their relationship deepened. It was like discovering a new friend who truly understood her. James became someone she could lean on, especially with her grandmother's worsening condition. But soon after they began dating, something changed. His care and protectiveness, which initially comforted her, started feeling like control. He'd make comments about her friends, subtly discouraging her from meeting them. "You're better off without them," he'd say, or, "They don't really care about you." Julie brushed off these comments, thinking he was just concerned. But then his control tightened. He began questioning her whereabouts, wanting to know every detail of her day. "Who were you talking to?" he'd ask, his tone hard. Julie felt a pang of unease, but she convinced herself it was just his way of showing he cared. Yet the nagging feeling grew stronger, like a warning she couldn't ignore. Before long, James's controlling behavior extended to every corner of Julie's life. He insisted she quit her job at the library, saying he could take care of her financially. "You don't need to work, Julie. Trust me," he would say, his tone both reassuring and firm. Though reluctant, Julie eventually agreed, thinking it was best to keep peace in their relationship. But soon after, she began to feel the weight of her dependency on him. She missed the independence her job had given her, the sense of purpose and freedom it had provided. Now she found herself isolated, with James being her only connection to the outside world. Gradually, her once lively spirit faded, replaced by a deep sense of unease and regret. She started to see that the man she thought she loved was not who he appeared to be. But by the time she realized this, James had constructed a cage around her life, leaving her trapped and isolated. The situation worsened when James started monitoring her every move. He'd check her phone, questioning every message and call. "Who is Cheryl?" he demanded one night, his eyes filled with suspicion. "She's my best friend," Julie replied, her voice small, hoping to calm his anger. But James scoffed, dismissing her explanation. "She's no good for you. I don't want you talking to her anymore," he said coldly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Julie felt a growing sense of dread as she realized the extent of his possessiveness. She could hardly believe this was the same man who had once listened to her pain with such kindness. Now he was the source of her suffering, and his grip on her life felt inescapable. Trapped in his web, Julie began to feel like a ghost in her own life, her vibrant personality smothered by James's controlling presence. Every day became a silent struggle as she tried to hold on to the last fragments of who she was. One night, after a particularly heated argument, James's anger reached a frightening level. "You think you can live without me?" he sneered, his voice filled with menace. Grabbing her arm, he dragged her to a small, dark room at the back of the house, locking her inside. "Maybe sometime in the dark will teach you to appreciate what you have," he said coldly before shutting the door. Left alone in the pitch-black room, Julie's heart pounded with fear. She had always been terrified of the dark, a fear she had once confided in him, back when she thought he cared. Now, he was using her deepest fears against her, leaving her trembling and helpless. Hours passed in the suffocating darkness, each minute amplifying her terror. She felt a breaking point approaching, but in the midst of her despair, a flicker of defiance stirred. She knew she couldn't keep living like this. She had to find a way out, for the sake of her sanity and her life. Days after this terrifying incident, Julie discovered she was pregnant. Holding the positive test in her trembling hands, a surge of emotions washed over her. fear, confusion, and a fierce determination to protect her unborn child. She hoped the news would soften James, perhaps rekindling the kindness he once showed her. But when she told him, his reaction was cold and unfeeling. "A baby? No, that's not happening," he said, dismissing her hopes in an instant. Julie felt a wave of despair as she realized the depth of his cruelty. This was no longer just about her. She had to protect her child from the darkness James had brought into her life. Summoning all her courage, she reached out to her cousin Charles, who worked with the FBI. Whispering her story over the phone, Julie felt a glimmer of hope as Charles reassured her, promising to help her escape. It was the first time in months she felt a lifeline, a fragile thread pulling her toward freedom. The plan was set, and the day of her escape arrived. As police burst through the door, arresting James, Julie watched in stunned relief. Charles stepped forward, his face filled with fierce protectiveness. "You're safe now, Julie," he said, his words like a balm to her soul. She felt tears streaming down her face, the weight of her suffering finally lifting. Later, as she settled into her own apartment, her heart swelled with gratitude. She had survived, not just for herself, but for her unborn child. The darkness of her past lingered, but it no longer held power over her. With each passing day, she rebuilt her life, drawing strength from her newfound freedom. Holding her baby close, Julie finally felt at peace, knowing they were safe. The trauma of her past remained, but so did a fierce sense of hope. A hope that one day she could fully heal and reclaim the joy she had once lost.